Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Anthony Annucci, New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision.
Questions? Marty, will you have questions for him? Questions from the commissioner? Will you ask Diane?
Diane, you have questions for the commissioner?
I'm sure I do.
She's sure she does.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome. We're glad to have your testimony, Commissioner.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Young, Chairwoman Weinstein, and other distinguished chairs and members of the legislature. I am Anthony J. Annucci, Acting Commissioner for the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. It is my honor to discuss some of the highlights of Governor Cuomo's executive budget plan. Last year, New York appropriately raised the age of criminal responsibility in stages to 18. Since then, we have worked in coordination with our state and local partners, and this year we will transition Hudson and Adirondack into adolescent offender facilities to become operational by October 1st. In 2019, we will convert the previously closed Groveland Annex to a standalone adolescent offender facility. Also, we will continue to reform the use and conditions of solitary confinement through the multi-year comprehensive settlement with the New York Civil Liberties Union. Since implementation in 2016, there has been an impressive 29% reduction in the number of inmates serving sanctions in a special housing unit cell, and a 25% decrease in the average length of stay of an inmate in a SHU cell. During the same period, assaults on staff were reduced approximately 11%. To continue building on this success, Governor Cuomo has directed docs to consolidate SHU beds by closing one housing unit at Cayuga, Upstate, and Southport correctional facilities. Upon completion of these consolidations and throughout the implementation of this historic agreement, New York will have removed more than 1,200 SHU beds. Safety and security will again remain a top priority. Working with the unions, we have implemented and will expand upon a variety of technological enhancements, training improvements, and policy changes. The department will continue installing a number of fixed camera systems. After initially piloting the use of body cameras at Clinton and Bedford Hills, we will also expand their use to other facilities and our Office of Special Investigations. Lastly, since the department has successfully piloted the use of pepper spray, this year we will operationalize it statewide. Thus far, among the results of the pilot at 4 test facilities is an 11% reduction in the number of reported staff injuries associated with staff assaults. As we continue to use technology to make our prisons safer, we will also leverage it to improve operations and interactions with family and friends by expanding services to our population. The department plans to move to an electronic inmate trust account services system, which will allow family and friends to more easily deposit money, as well as provide quicker access to the funds for the population. Through this platform, releasees will be issued debit cards that can be transitioned to a bank account in the community. In a groundbreaking move, the department will provide each incarcerated individual a tablet at no cost, with the ability to access free educational material and e-books, and to file grievances. Individuals will also have the option to purchase music and additional e-books, and to use a secure email system to communicate with family and friends. We have also awarded a new inmate telephone system contract, resulting in a reduction in the per-minute call rate to be one of the lowest in the nation, while also securing the ability to make permanent our SHU pilot tablet program to provide easier access to the telephone and preloaded educational materials. The budget will also build upon proven reentry initiatives with an expansion of the merit time and limited credit time allowance statutes, as well as a pilot to place up to 100 LCTA-eligible inmates into educational release and work release. Also, geriatric parole will be authorized for inmates over 55 with debilitating age-related conditions. The parole supervision fee, which inhibits reentry, will be repealed. And the Board of Parole, in conjunction with community supervision staff, are engaging with the Governor's Reentry Council for a comprehensive review of parole revocation guidelines and practices. Appropriate alternatives to incarceration for those technical violators who pose little risk to reoffend will be prioritized. This year, we will also expand our Veterans Residential Therapeutic Program to a maximum security prison. This program provides treatment services in a therapeutic community setting to the veteran population to heal and restore them to a pro-social state. For community supervision, we have implemented a strategic plan to improve outcomes for parolees to include monitoring enrollment in substance abuse treatment, anger management, sex offender counseling, domestic violence programs, mental health services, and employment and vocational training programs. Additionally, we continue to study our Reset initiative, which focuses on case plan-driven techniques that concentrate on criminogenic risks and needs to enhance public safety. This evidence-based approach continues to show indications of better outcomes by taking swift, certain, and fair actions toward new delinquent behavior, while also acknowledging and rewarding positive achievements. In conclusion, this year we will embark on many exciting initiatives that will have a positive impact throughout the entire agency. We will rely on new technologies to deliver transformative programs and initiatives, while our professional, well-trained, and dedicated workforce will continue performing their daily and oftentimes dangerous responsibilities in an exemplary manner. The Governor's proposed budget will build on criminal justice reform and place stocks in an ideal position to fulfill its expectations. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner, and we appreciate that testimony very much. I'd like to start with a few questions. And first of all, I have spent time visiting all the facilities that are either in my Senate district or surround it. And recently, I had the opportunity to go back to Attica, which I hadn't visited since I was a reporter in my early 20s, many years ago. So the first question has to do with a proposal by the Governor, but could you please explain what the purpose is of special housing units?
Special housing unit is the means by which we basically separate from the general population those individuals whose misbehavior places other inmates at risk, such as a serious assault or possession of a large amount of contraband or drugs. So they are separated from the general population pursuant to a disciplinary hearing and sanction that may impose placement in the special housing unit. Our system is different from others in that we have a fixed system with penalties for periods of time in a special housing unit. Once that is served, the person is released. And we, as you know, are in the process of implementing a multi-year agreement with the New York Civil Liberties Union to transform our SHUs to basically provide more services so that, consistent with where the entire country is going, we can safely say that you will not be at risk of harm when you're placed in these shoes with all of the changes that we are making.
So with the shoes, they're designed to protect other inmates from potential violence, protect a person maybe from himself, protect the staff, correct?
Correct.
So you mentioned something about a national trend, but in the Governor's proposal, there's a section that proposes closing 900 special housing unit beds. So where will those inmates that are currently residing in those beds be relocated?
They're not currently residing in those beds, Senators. Those are vacant beds.
So
we
they're
have
all
that many vacancies.
There are
in our entire-
900 in the system today. There are 900 vacant beds.
Well, there are vacant beds, and there are beds that we have put offline and filled with alternatives. For example, the step-down unit at Greenhaven, the step-down unit at Wendy are providing out-of-cell time for individuals, preparing them for release, and so when they're released to the community, we don't consider them to be traditional SHU beds.
So today, you're saying that those step down and those other beds, those shoe beds are vacant, or is this going to be created?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the...
So you're creating this, it sounds like. You're saying that there aren't?
It's a combination of two things. It's a combination of the shoe population has dramatically been reduced, and at the same time, we are putting online new programs that are providing out-of-cell time and treatment and therapy, and therefore we do not need this many shoe beds.
How long has DOCS been reducing the shoe beds?
Since we started the agreement and converted a number of these, you may also recall that when we enacted all the laws to deal with the seriously mentally ill, we took at RMH, the RMHU that's now at Marcy, that would originally was a 200-bed S block. We converted that to an RMHU for the seriously mentally ill. And we have converted other units. I can probably compile a master list. I just can't think of everything off the top of my head right now.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Do you envision closing more shoe beds in the future?
I don't envision it right now, but I'm really anticipating what the system will look like when everything is brought online. And we have yet to enact the centerpiece of the agreement, which is the 252-bed step-down program at Southport. That's planned. It's going to take a bit of time to build up and provide the necessary program space in the group recreation areas. Later this year, we will implement the step-down unit at Lakeview. So I am confident when all is brought online that we will retain the ability to safely segregate individuals, but provide them the needed out-of-cell treatment and programming so that there is no potential risk of harm, keeping everybody safe.
Thank you for that answer, Commissioner. So you just referenced Lakeview, which is in my Senate district. Could you give more information on what's happening there?
I didn't quite get that, Senator.
Is my mic working? My mic's not working? Okay. So, Commissioner, you just mentioned Lakeview, which is
Yes.
in my Senate district. Could you please give more information as to what's happening there?
In terms of what our plans are for that
Yes.
unit? Yes. That is going to be a program designed primarily for the offenders that keep cycling in and out of SHU because they keep taking drugs and they have drug dependencies. And so this is a special program that's going to be for them. It's going to focus on their substance abuse and hopefully get them to finally understand that they need to refrain from this. And it'll be very heavily focused on treatment.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Just switching gears, you referenced raise the age, and it would be beneficial, I believe, to the legislature to hear directly from you more information about what transformations DOCS has undertaken since raise the age was enacted.
Yes, and obviously we got a head start because the governor issued his executive order a couple of years ago, which required us to remove all 16 and 17-year-olds from the adult system and house them at Hudson. And now with the law, we are nicely positioned to transform Hudson and make it into an adolescent offender facility when that law takes effect. It has been eye-opening for us. We've worked very closely with the Office of Children and Family Services to really develop age-appropriate programming for this cohort and also to properly train staff. So we are now in the midst of doing physical rehabilitation at Adirondack and making individual rooms for this population and developing programs that are specifically aimed at the young. And it's a work in progress to some degree. For example, we just met with Hudson Link. We want to bring a college program there. We want to put the barbering program there. We want to bring credible messengers, that people who have been through the system and who have made it on the outside to come and speak to this cohort. So they're very, very challenging. The number of females we have are only 1 or 2 at a time. I was just there a week ago for the graduation of one who received her high school diploma. She was the first one from that facility to get a high school diploma, but I wanted to be there, congratulate her. She stood up, thanked the facility, and said, if it's not for this facility, I would not have turned my life around. So that was very gratifying. We took some pictures with mother and family, and we're definitely moving in the right direction there.
Thank you for sharing that. How many youth are at Hudson right now?
We have, I think, 60 at Hudson and 6 at Coxsackie. Coxsackie is now where we house the 16 and 17-year-olds that require maximum security placement, but we are going to have everybody stay at Hudson when the law changes. There's just no more maximum security.
So there was $30 million spent, I believe, so far to retrofit Hudson. Can you give us a little bit more information as to how that money was spent?
A lot of it had to do with, upgrading and being able to construct the rec areas, the juvenile separation unit that is there. Obviously, there will be times when inmates will fight with each other, youth will fight with each other, and we have to be able to separate them, but we also want to give them group recreation if needed. We also, if we have to, use what we call the restart chairs so that to prevent them from fighting. So there's a lot of different upgrades, as well as the fact that we had to have a whole separate area for the females. That was always a male facility, except many, many, many years ago. But to be able to do all of those things and secure the perimeter, et cetera, there's a lot of work. But I can get you the full rundown on those costs, Senator, if you wish.
Thank you. That would be helpful. What about OCFS? You referenced them just a few minutes ago. And what do you see your role, or OCFS's role, being moving forward as far as working with docs?
They've been our partners from day one, and we really value their experience, their knowledge, advising us on what the appropriate curriculum should be in programs. They, in turn, have admired some of the things we have. They were very complimentary of the vocational programs that we have there as well. We studied their educational programs. They actually have co-ed classrooms for some of their college program, I believe, at Columbia. So we'll certainly keep an open mind and be able to communicate regularly and take their input.
Thank you for that. You mentioned Groveland. Could you tell us about that?
Groveland had an annex that we closed a number of years ago when we were downsizing in general, and that is an ideal location with a lot of rehab work, obviously, to make it as the third adolescent offender facility. Even though the numbers are low, what we anticipate is that once the law is changed, and once you have someone who's, let's say, a week from their 18th birthday and gets sentenced to, a state imprisonment sentence, at a minimum, we have to hold on to that person for 2 years. Right now, when a 16 or 17-year-old turns 18, we're transferring them to the adult system. But going forward, we will hold on to those people for at least 2 years, even if they're only a week shy of their 18th birthday. So we feel with these 3 facilities, and again, it's hard to predict exactly what the numbers will be, this will give us the latitude, because in effect, this is going to be a system within a system, separate and distinct entirely from the adult system.
One of the things I wanted to ask about, so we have 3 facilities. It's Coxsackie, right? You said Hudson and Groveland. Those are the 3?
No, Coxsackie is right now used in accordance with the governor's executive order for those 16 and 17-year-olds that require maximum security placement. But that is going to stop, obviously. Probably in the very near future, we'll just have anybody coming in on the current law. We feel confident we can handle them safely at Hudson. So that's going to just phase out, and we're going to use Coxsackie for a different purpose.
Okay, so...
But the 3 facilities will be Hudson, Adirondack, and then Groveland.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So I wanted to ask about transporting the youth population. Who is responsible for that? So say, for example, in Chautauqua County, which I represent, there has to be a youth who's transported from Chautauqua County to Hudson.
That's what happens now, Senator. That is right now the sole reception place in accordance with the governor's executive order for any 16 or 17-year-old that's sentenced. And the counties from around the state, they've arranged, sometimes they coordinate with one another, and someone will pick up one of their youth and drive them. But they take them to Hudson because that's the only place that we currently use as a reception location for the 16 and 17-year-olds, which is another thing that we had to rehab. We had to make it a reception center as well.
So who is responsible for the cost of transporting these young people?
Well, local officials have always been responsible for transporting them. They have applied to us for reimbursement under a statute that the governor is now proposing to amend. Instead of continuing to reimburse them for a portion of their salaries, they will be reimbursed, I believe, for regular mileage.
So there is some reimbursement to the local governments?
It's the sheriff, I believe, that submits the request for reimbursement.
Okay, so if it's not based on the salaries, is that actually a drop in reimbursement to the local governments? And the reason I ask that is because Senator Gallivan, Senator Lanza, and I negotiated with the governor on the raise the age proposal, and part of the deal, for lack of a better word, was that there wouldn't be any local costs imposed on governments, local governments. So
I think we're mixing a little bit of apples and oranges. The change I talked about in the law that the governor's proposing is a change for all the counties in the state, however they're delivering to us individuals that are state ready, whether they're adolescent offenders or whether they're adults. Right now under the law, they apply for reimbursement, and in that bill to us is a portion of their salaries. And that's pretty much an antiquated statute, so across the board, we are making that change and treating everybody uniformly. They'll get reimbursed for their travel. And part of the thinking, Senator, I should point out, is that we have been very accommodating, my agency, to the needs of the local counties when they have someone in their custody that requires extraordinary mental health care or medical care. And under provision of the law that's called Section 504 of the Correction Law, they've come to me and they said, would you, instead of us having to have this individual with us and pay enormous outside hospital costs, can you take them into one of your regional medical units? And I have done that repeatedly and saved a lot of counties a fortune, and we always get thanked by the sheriffs, by the Sheriff's Association. We always get that feedback that they are extraordinarily appreciative of us doing that.
no, and I think that we're appreciative of that also, but I just want you to give me an answer to my question. Does the governor's proposal included in the budget actually reduce funding to local governments for the transportation costs? Is it going to net out to be less to the local governments or more to the local governments? How is it going to net out?
Well, the statute that I'm talking about that's been changed, obviously there will be less reimbursement going back to the sheriffs for the transportation costs.
Thank you.
Assemblyman Weprin, Assembly Chair of Corrections.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Commissioner. I just want to say on a personal note, this is my second year as Chair of Corrections, and you've been very open and responsive to my office last year and this year, and I think we have a very good working relationship, and I appreciate that, and hopefully that'll continue. And I've also enjoyed many programs that we've witnessed together, including the most recent performance that we were at Greenhaven, and I want to keep that going, obviously, and look forward to that. I also happy to see the governor's proposal on geriatric parole, something that I've been pushing for a while, and I'm actually I'm going to be amending my bill, if I haven't already done it, to go from 60 to 55 based on your proposal, and I thank you for making my bill stronger. Can you give me an indication about how many inmates currently are over 55 in facilities in the state?
I had that number, Senator, Assemblyman. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is, in looking at, according to our bill, the number of individuals who meet the criteria crime-wise and who either today are housed in a unit for the cognitively impaired or a regional medical unit, which means they would have difficulty functioning, taking care of themselves in a general confinement setting, that number is somewhere around a little below 200, I believe about 195. But I can separately get to you the number that are 55 and older. And it is a population that has slowly and steadily increased, which has also driven, our hospital costs. Even though we had 800 less hospital days than the year before, costs of hospital treatment go up, obviously, and obviously we're looking, this is a humanitarian gesture, but obviously we'll also save the state money.
I appreciate that. I know the geriatric parole proposal creates a health standard of a chronic or serious condition, disease, syndrome, or infirmity exacerbated by age that has rendered the person so physically or cognitively debilitated or incapacitated that the ability to provide, and I'm quoting from the bill, self-care within prison is substantially diminished. Could you define what that means, and generally what kinds of illnesses are we talking about?
We carefully sat down with all the people involved in making and writing the statute, and in particular we got a lot of feedback from my chief medical officer, Dr. Carl Koningsman, and he was very clear that there's no per se definition of conditions that are only applicable to people at a certain age, that you can have some of these conditions at any age, as we know, whether it's cancer, high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. But we do know that many people who, when they get these conditions in advanced ages, it is more debilitating for them. So we are looking at the individual as a whole, not just his age per se, but what the conditions are and what, most importantly, his ability to self-ambulate and take care of himself in a correctional facility setting. And the other important thing is that this statute nicely bifurcates the responsibility for determining dangerousness. It's no longer incumbent upon my chief medical officer and me as commissioner to prove it, to determine whether or not the person is capable of presenting no risk of harm to the public. That responsibility will now solely fall to the Board of Parole, which I think is a better way of handling things, because they do it as a face-to-face interview. Dr. Koningsman was more or less doing this on paper review, the medical records he gets. He then passes it up to me, and 99% of the time I sign off. My office will then, as is the current practice, send out the letters to the judge, DA, district attorney on behalf of the Board of Parole to get input, as the case is being then referred to the Board of Parole for a final determination.
Okay, staff has given me a calculation of 5,610 inmates currently incarcerated over 55. Does that sound like
yeah, that sounds
a good number?
Good.
Okay, moving on to a couple of other topics. Merit time and limited credit time allowance expansion. I've strongly supported that, but I have a question. Why continue to have different criteria and time reductions for the two programs? Shouldn't achievement and good behavior be rewarded in the same way, regardless of the class of the offense?
Yeah, there's a real history to this. The maritime statute goes back to, I think, 1997 to 98, and that's the time when the state wanted to differentiate significantly between what would happen with violent felony offenders and what would happen with the nonviolent felony offenders. And so there was a recognition that nonviolent offenders, and particularly since we had so many drug offenders, that we would allow them the ability to potentially earn an earlier release. And so it was based upon a formula, the benefit being 1/6 off the minimum sentence. If you serve 6 to 18 years, you qualify for merit time by doing one of those programs, whether it's substance abuse treatment, whether it's get your GED, a vocational program, or performing 400 hours or more of community service as part of a work group, plus a positive disciplinary record, you would get the benefit. Now, after the passage of time, and when the Sentencing Commission that was chaired by then Director of Criminal Justice Denise O'Donnell, there's a recognition that we also need to look at a lot of people that may be in prison for serious offenses, but they're in for a long time, and they've changed their lives around. And having nothing that enables them to get any kind of time reduction was counterproductive. So after discussing this issue for a while, we came up with an agreement that there should be some ability to earn a reduction of time. And rather than make it formula-driven by taking a percentage, et cetera, we recognized why not make it just a neat, clean 6-month reduction. In the case of anybody serving an indeterminate sentence without a life term maximum, that would be 6 months off the CR term. In the case of anybody with a life term maximum, it would be 6 months off the minimum sentence. So if it's 15 to life, you'd get out after, potentially with the Board of Parole approval, after 14 and a half years. But there was a recognition that because these are more serious offenses, the bar had to be raised higher. So generally speaking, this is a list of pretty significant programs. It's a lot easier to get a GED than to get your master's degree from the theology school that is present at Sing Sing. If you look through all the different program listings, there's, I believe, 12 of them now. They're pretty demanding. So there's a recognition, and it's consistent with their recommendations. Yes, give them a benefit, but make it much more demanding. And I think the new ones that we're proposing are very good. The cosmetology, we just got an agreement with the Department of State, Department of Education, that we can license. And anybody passes the test can actually receive a license while incarcerated and then go out and potentially get a job in that business. So we wanted to do that. We wanted to do the barbering. And, of course, the third thing is the T for C plus 1 year in work release.
Yeah, I've actually personally visited a number of those programs and was very impressed. So I hope you continue in those veins of adding more programs, and I appreciate the work that you and the governor have done in that area. When I first became chair of corrections last January, one of the issues that was obviously a problem were the vacancies in parole commissioners, and I'm very happy to see that the governor filled those, including one of our staff members that you know. So that's positive, and I'm very happy to see that your proposal to add 3 new commissioners. How many parole commissioners do we have now? I've heard different numbers. I've heard 16, 17.
I think we're funded for 17, but I think there was 1 vacancy recently created.
So there'll be 17, and then the additional 3...
Including the chairwoman.
The additional 3 is included in that or on top of that? It will be on top of the 17.
It includes the 3 that recently appointed, so we're funded for 17.
No, but I'm saying the 3 that are proposed, that are in the current budget. There's a proposal to add 3 new.
No, that's the current.
That's the current. So it'll be a full complement would be 17.
I believe. Let me double check on that, though. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, if you could let me know. The other thing that I've been a strong supporter of, and I know you have as well, is the video visitation, not to supplement regular visitation, as you know, I've been a strong advocate for regular visitation, but as a supplement to regular visitation. Can you give us an update on how many facilities have the video conferencing visitation and how that's working?
I know we have arrangements, contracts with the Osborne Association, the Children's Center, and I think another entity called Jericho. I think it's the Child's Center that has Bedford Hills and Albion, and I forget the sites. It might be one in the Bronx, one in Brooklyn. Osborne, I think, had Clinton and one other, and I can't remember everyone. I will get you all of that. I had it all written down in my notes, but I know they're looking to expand, including we want to put it at the youth facility at Hudson as well. Okay, great. And just one last question. I know we went through that whole issue with the package program, which was rescinded, but during that process, when I was contacted by many advocacy groups, it was either a rumor or something that people had mentioned that there were certain commissary facilities that were going to be closed or not taking place in different facilities because of this new package program, which is no longer in existence. Are there any facilities contemplating removing commissary privileges and No,
so
we never.
No truth to that.
That was never part of the secure package vendor program to close commissaries. We always want to have commissaries. We always want to have the ability for inmates to purchase what they want.
Well, I'm happy to hear that because I've gotten, favorable comments, on commissaries, and there was that rumor going around during that program, so I'm happy to hear that that is not, in fact, the case.
No.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm okay for now.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Senator Gallivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Thanks for your patience. I too, would like to thank you for your cooperation as our offices have worked together over the past number of years, and I look forward to that continuing, of course. I want to pick up on a couple things discussed already. First, we'll start with SHU, special housing. And I know that you described it. Is it fair to say, though, that the use of special housing is among the tools that helps provide for safety, security, and order in a facility?
Yes.
Can you describe the specific cell, and how does the cell itself, where the inmate resides, how does it differ than the normal cell in regular housing?
For starters, compared to a normal cell, there's basically no property. And it's also removed to a remote part of the facility, so there's not access or travel by other inmates, not a lot of contact with other people. But there is a fair amount of contact when people make rounds, when the supervisors make rounds, the sergeants, the ORC, or Offender Rehabilitation Coordinator, the chaplain may make site visits and check on people, depending upon if it's an OMH level facility, the clinician will make rounds. So there's that kind of activity, but in terms of its physical location, it's physically removed from the general confinement aspects of a facility.
How about its physical size as compared?
The cells vary, but generally speaking, they're pretty much comparable to what you'd find in a normal general confinement cell.
Are you able to distinguish it from what sometimes the general public gets a view of it from television or the movies, like Orange is the New Black, Shawshank Redemption, that pit that's where it's dark and it's very small? I mean, can you distinguish it from that?
No, I don't think they're quite that small, but it's the problem is, and the experts tell us that 23 hours a day confinement over a long period of time does potentially pose a risk of harm. So all of these programs that we developed, and I see us moving in a very similar path to what we did when we enacted all these programs for the mentally ill. We provided all these programs, all these special beds that provide out-of-cell treatment and programming. And that's a lot of what we're going to be doing going forward, as well as the amenities that are being provided while they're in their SHU cells, such as we have presently a rolling telephone cards where they now, as part of the PIM system, can make, I believe, a once-per-month phone call to family.
So that's a move you're referring to. Inmates in SHU
Yes.
would ultimately, for what they don't have now, would ultimately have that whole menu of programs available to them with the movement or where you're moving to.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure if I understood you correctly. So what you just described, you talked about making a movement towards, or what you're working towards, and that is offering that full range of programs to the inmates that are housed in the special housing.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So we talk about the safety and security of the facility, and I know that always is a concern of yours based on our discussions. And in your testimony, you talked about some of the pilots that were started that work towards that. Some of them came about as a result of the Inspector General report, obviously, and some of them were things that you had been working on and trying to implement for years. Is it ultimately your intention, these various programs, you talked specifically about pepper spray, and in those 4 facilities you had a reduction of assaults on staff. Is it ultimately your intention to be expanding these various
Pepper
programs?
spray, it's our intention to make that statewide. Contraband
is always a concern, and we still have sky-high levels of assaults, inmate on inmate, inmate on staff. Are there other tools that you haven't implemented yet that could be used, such as one of the things that we are trying to provide the ability to use in legislation, and then obviously funding has to follow, would be the use of body scanners. The use of body scanners. Rikers Island used them for several months. They used them for the most part following visitation. Inmates would go through them, and they saw a significant reduction of violence inside the facility. So, I mean, have you considered other things that you're not doing to date?
I can tell you that we've done a lot to try and combat contraband. I've added significantly the K-9 units. We have 9 in special ops, and we have 2 more in our OSI unit. And together, we have made hundreds of arrests. They have really been extraordinarily effective. Our partnership with the state police have also come in and allowed their teams to work as well. They're very good at detecting illegal substances. And so we will continue to do that, potentially expand in the future as we go. With respect to body scanners, my understanding, and you and I briefly had a conversation about that, is that it may either violate the public health law or may violate one of the regulations.
Yes. That's exactly what the legislation would provide for. Currently, there's a limitation on who can use the body scanners. There's been some question of safety, but we'll treat that as a separate issue for now. But it is the authority to use it under the public health law. However, if we assume that that obstacle is overcome, is that something that you've considered using?
Well,
Senator, or would it be valuable to use?
There's a lot to consider there. These are the overwhelming majority of families that come, young children that come. We're trying to make an atmosphere where they can maintain family connections, because that is critical for reentry. And I don't want to make a final determination, because obviously I keep an open mind about everything. But I certainly don't want to create another problem, make people feel that this is, I have to see it in operation. Is it a humiliating experience, et cetera? What I can also tell you that we've done...
Commissioner, if I may, no, this would only be, the use at Rikers and the use that I would propose would solely be for the inmates to pass through after they leave the facility or after they follow a visit. It would not be the visitors themselves.
Okay, well, that's different.
I understand your concern with the visitors.
But the problem is, once drugs get into the facility, right, they can be left in a restroom, and people have elaborate ways to get it out. So the best defense is to prevent it from coming in the first place. I will also say that we have completely implemented our visitor processing identification system, so that when a visitor has been identified as trying to bring in drugs at one facility, should that person try and enter another facility under a different name with different identification, we now know who they are, yes, and prevent their entrance.
Thank you. The last area right now, for the sake of the time that I have, the secure vendor package program, I know that was a goal for years and years, and it's recognized as a best practice nationwide. There were some problems with it, and the governor responded by pulling that back. Now, I think I have the correct understanding of that the governor's actions was to pull it back until you work out the problems. Do I have that correct understanding?
It clearly was the right decision to make.
But is that the correct understanding? That this is not pull it back and get rid of it.
Right. This is
pull
suspended.
It back and
the term suspended was used so that we can have an opportunity to take into consideration all the feedback that we've received thus far. Sitting down with the unions, getting their input, sitting down with our superintendents, particularly at the 3 facilities where it was a pilot, listening to the advocates, listening to the inmates, perhaps talking further with the vendors that we had enlisted. And I'm confident that at some point in the future, we can craft a proposal that will still accomplish the security things that we need accomplished, but balance those other considerations. There are pilots that work well, And unfortunately, this was one that right out of the block, it generated a lot of problems. And I will take responsibility for some of that, and that I should have better prepared and explained, because there was some misinformation about what was going on as well. Lesson learned. I think we can go forward in the future. I can't give you a timetable because we have that and we have so many other things that we're doing at the same time. But it remains an important issue for us.
All right, Commissioner, thank you. And thank you again for your efforts and across your agency, the 25, 30,000, a very difficult, challenging job from top to bottom, I understand.
Yeah,
that.
thank you, Senator. I'm very proud of the 29,000 plus people. They never cease to amaze me, every one of them, what they do.
With good reason. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Assemblyman Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I just wanted to kind of touch on a few areas. First, I know when we're talking about the special housing units that's going on in the budget, and I know that's part of this is to comply with the NICLU settlement. You know, in full disclosure, I was not supportive of that when I saw that. I think, as one of my colleagues up here mentioned, the use of the SHU is a tool that is used to keep our correction officers that are in our facilities safe, but not just our correction officers, but the inmates that are trying to do their time and not try to be a part of a problem. So in the budget, I know there's about $6.8 million in savings, 110 FTEs that are going to be, they said they can be transferred. And I know part of that NICLU settlement, there's a lot of money that's being invested to comply with that. But like for some of these workers who might be dislocated and might have to travel hundreds of miles away to another facility, away from their families, is there going to be any accommodations for them for housing or for travel to make their lives a little easier when they might be losing their job?
We're very confident that we can accommodate as best as possible the staff that are at these units. I attrit every pay period, I believe, something like 54, 55 staff. So there's always vacancies being created. As these units get emptied, the staff will work with them to get them in other jobs in that facility, and I believe we're going to leave them there till May, when there's a re-ranking list, and so they'll have better options to pursue. So my system changes very quickly. There's a lot of attrition. There's a lot of new demands for correction officers, and in fact, we are predicting that we will need in the upcoming fiscal year as many as 8 academy classes to fill the vacancies in our system that are created.
Because one of the areas, not physically in my district, but nearby is Southport, so definitely have some concerns relative to the employees are there. I know there's going to be changes being made to the facility, and I think anything that would be able to allow those individuals who have been there for a number of years to stay there where they have their families, I think would be a positive thing, and also to send a positive message to them through this transition. I want to get into the issue of, one of the big issues we know is drugs are a big problem in our prisons. And from some of the information I'm getting, and I would hope that maybe you can clarify for us statewide, the number of drug tests that are going on in the prisons, how many people are testing positive, what are the results of those tests? Because I think you mentioned in your statement that you would rather see us get to them before they get into the prison than afterward. And I think on that front, you mentioned the use of the canine drug dogs, and we have 54 correctional facilities across the state, and I think I heard you say we have 11 that we're using. I think the success of the canine drug is well known. Why not make that investment and put them in every facility across the state? Another tool that's given to our law enforcement, so if people are coming in with drugs, we can catch them before it gets in. And that will help relieve the powder keg environment that, quite frankly, I think is going on in our facilities, whether they're maximum or medium security prison. Any plans on your part, in addition to the millions of dollars that are being invested for the NICLU settlement, to give our officers, our COs, and our prisons more drug dogs in the facilities, to keep them out when they get in? And then, because the package program was put aside. Some people thought it was a bad idea, some people thought it was a good idea, but the drug dogs, I think everyone can recognize it's a good idea. Let's get to them before they get into the prisons and put them in every facility. Can't cost that much money and would make a significant impact on addressing the drug problems. Because I've heard some statistics, 2,500 annual just in one region of drug tests, and that's something we have to address, because with the gangs that we know are in our facilities, with the assaults that are rising dramatically, and from your own numbers, from 2012, probably 40% inmate on staff assaults and on inmate assaults up 70%, if you look at the numbers. That's a powder keg environment. And I don't know about anyone else, but and I'm sure they do. Every so often there's an article in the paper about an inmate getting attacked or a corrections officer getting attacked by an inmate. And I think we need to do more to give them the tools they need to protect themselves because they have a very dangerous job. And the NICU settlement, I think, takes tools away from them. I think the canine, the drugs could be an issue to help them. So is there anything you can do to give us the drug result test, and what's your plans on expanding the canine unit statewide to all our facilities to address this problem?
Well, there's a lot you said there, Assemblyman. I certainly respect everything that you've said. I couldn't agree more that our staff have a tough job, and I'm very proud of the job that they do. I don't think at this point we're ready to expand the canine units, but I can tell you that I've really stepped up our OSI narcotics unit. We have phenomenal means of intelligence that we learn of who's potentially smuggling drugs in. We work with outside law enforcement. We seek criminal prosecutions because anybody trying to smuggle drugs into a correctional facility is a felony. Dangerous drugs, it should raise it to a felony. So I can tell you that we are open to expanding this. I don't know if putting a team, a canine at every facility would still be 100% effective. But back to your earlier question as to the percentage of individuals that test positive by random urinalysis, I checked it a while ago, but it's not nearly as high as you might think. It's.
Could you provide those information?
Yeah, I can definitely get those. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'll get that for you.
That's fine. Another question. One of the issues that we've talked about in the past, is the issue of double bunking and double selling. And again, with the NICU settlement, there's a lot of millions of dollars being invested into the correctional facilities to address that. But by, I think, our own statistics, we still have in the neighborhood of 6,494 combination of double bunks and double cells in our facilities, both at maximum, medium facilities. Certainly, that's an environment that I believe, a lot of my colleagues believe, is a dangerous environment, not just for the corrections officers who are in these facilities, but for the inmates. I've been to a facility where it was in a dorm-like setting, because I have toured all the facilities in and around my district, and you would have 60 inmates in a room, not a big room, and they were in a cubicle, double bunk, and not much bigger space than me to Mr. Wepner. And I don't think that's a positive environment. I know the administration and the governor has gone around touting the closure of prisons and is proud of it. But we should get rid of these double bunks and double cells as quick as possible to make for a safer environment, not just for our corrections officers, but for the inmates that are in these facilities. And I think we should have a plan in place, because there's a lot of plans to deal with the NICU settlement, but not a lot of plans to deal with the double bunking and double selling. And I think between the drugs and the double bunking and double selling, and we know the assaults are up dramatically. I know you said there's a decrease, but if you look from 2012 to now, dramatic increase in the assaults on our corrections officers and a dramatic increase in assaults on inmates. And we're in a powder keg environment, and I'm very concerned about what's going to happen in these facilities. It's not enough just to go around saying we're closing prisons. We got to give our corrections officers the tools they need to do their job, but to do it so they can be safe, so they can get home to their families. And for the other inmates in the facility who are just trying to do their time, we have to be able to get the bad guys out of there and separate them from those instances. And that's where I'm concerned, where some of these settlements are taking away important tools to keep everyone else safe in that facility. I'd like to know your comments on that with the double bunking, double selling, and your plans on that. Yeah,
just to clarify, when we were overcrowded, we had to take 5% of our maximum security space and convert that to double cells. And these were very small cells that were built to just hold one person. And we did that at 13 of our then existing 14 maximum security facilities. Southport was the only example, so 5%. And I have basically, a few years ago, it started under my predecessor, but I continued it. We've taken down basically every cell in a max that had originally been converted, was originally a single and converted to double, with very few exceptions. I think just the depot at Auburn, and I think a few double cells at Downstate. So there's just a small number of double cells still being operated that were originally single cell construction. The new construction was double celled, and those are all 105 square feet. So those cells at Upstate and at Five Points, those are new maximum security facilities, all double celled with 105 square feet. And I believe the cadre unit at Southport also was double celled. Again, those cells were built large enough for two, and of course all the S blocks were built for two inmates. So there's ample space there, or at least it's not crowded. With respect to the dorms, there's a maximum under the standards allowed by the SCOC of 60 in a multiple occupancy unit. And in order to fit 60 in, you have to double the back 10 against the wall, and that's where the double bunks are. And I get it that, you know, people would say, well, if we put only 54 in instead of 60, because when we open them, that's exactly what we put in there. We put 54 because we put 2 beds on each end. So each cookie cutter facility, when it opened, had 54. We added 6 more consistent with an SCOC standard that allowed as many as 60. And to do it in such a way that the officer would have a full panoramic view of the dorm, we double bunked the back 10. So space-wise, it's just six more than what we originally had when they opened many, many years ago. But I understand your concerns, and again, I couldn't agree with you more that the officers have a tough job, and we should do everything possible to make them as safe as possible.
Thank you. Senate.
Thank you. Senator Ritchie.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. I would like to start by just following up on a couple of questions that Senator Gallivan had on the packaging policy. Just recently, I had the opportunity to tour, once again, the 5 facilities that I represent, and one of the main issues was the contraband or drugs coming into the facility. And they were looking forward to the packaging policy just because it's so hard to screen and make sure that they're keeping the drugs out. So just for clarification, the packaging policy is suspended. It is not suspended indefinitely?
Well, it's suspended until we can come back and create what we think is an acceptable policy. And of course, I will sit down with my principals when we get to that point and carefully lay out what we think is the reasonable alternative, and then a decision will be made where we go from there. Right now, it's just suspended.
So do you have any time frame for that? Because this is something that's been in the works for years.
Yeah, I can't give you any time frame, Senator. And if you were to ask me today or any time in the last 2 years, what is the single overriding challenge I have, I would answer today and any time in the past 2 years, there's no single challenge. The challenge is that we are doing so many things so quickly in this system. All of the changes that came about as a result of the Clinton escape, all the security enhancements, the de-escalation training, the new responsibilities we have to house adolescent offenders, the geriatric parole, studying the parole revocation guidelines. There's so many initiatives that we're doing so quickly. When you have a pilot like this that immediately stumbled, it takes away from our ability to make sure all the other things that we're doing are happening appropriately. So my intention is, yes, we're going to take our time, we're going to sit down carefully, we're going to look at what we had, but I can't take away from all these other things that are also very important as well, and a lot of them go to safety and security, such as expanding statewide the pepper the pepper spray program.
So I certainly understand what you're saying, that you have a number of moving parts, but the contraband and the drug issue is something that I heard at all 5 facilities, and not just at the 5 that I represent, but pretty much every facility across the state, that the situation is getting to a really dangerous level because of the drugs getting into the facility. So I would ask that, I understand it's complicated, that this doesn't just get put by the wayside for another couple of years, that this is something that's extremely important as a safety tool. And along with that, the pepper spray that you mentioned earlier, I know that I've had facilities who've reached out and asked for pepper spray and have not been able to get that. So that is something that is a priority at this point?
Yes, it's a priority.
Recently, I reached out to you with a letter on the personal alarms where there was an issue that they weren't working in a couple of the facilities, and I did receive a response back that that was going to be a priority. So I'm just wondering what the status of making sure that the personal alarms for the civilians working at the facilities, where are we at with that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember from my notes because there's a lot of things I had to go over, but I know we are replacing them. I don't know the exact schedule. They have, some of these systems are quite dated. I forget the 2 facilities that we just finished, but what I'll do, Senator, is I'll go back and I'll look at the schedule and I'll give you a written reply as to what our plan is going forward with that, because it is very important, civilian alarms.
Okay. And my next couple questions are on staffing levels. Just recently I learned that several months ago there was an incident with a generator and the facility was in the dark for most of the night. Luckily it happened at shift change, so there were extra officers who were available to stay over. But one of the staffing issues seems to be at critical level for the later shift from 11 to 7, that there are not enough officers who are able to rove or make the rounds on the grounds if in fact something does come up. Is that an issue that you think we need to look at staffing-wise?
Well, as you know, Senator, we added 268 additional staff in the last 2 years after a review of this 2/3 of the facilities. So our ratio, when compared to every other prison system in the country, is very favorable. It's basically 1 to 3. I'm not sure what facility you're talking about, and certainly when an emergency happens where a generator fails and there's housing units in the dark, yeah, we're pressed, and the initial solution would be mandating overtime for the existing staff that are there to make sure we're under control. But I'm not aware of any complaints that have been brought to our attention in central office about insufficient staff on the late shift at any facility. But if you have something in particular, let me know. We'll certainly take a good look at it.
Okay, and along the staffing lines, the issue of the number of officers who are retiring.
Yes.
Recently, I sponsored the bill that would allow an officer to collect, families to collect the pension if something were to happen. And it was vetoed by the governor. So it's a concern from a number of officers that I've met with and their families. And as we get more and more inexperienced guards at the facilities, those that are retiring in pretty big lots is a real concern. Can you tell me how you're going to address the attrition issue?
Well, everybody has free choice. I can't not allow staff to retire. I think the best thing I can do is everything humanly possible to make it a safe environment, and at the same time recognize the difficult job they have. One of the things I'm worried about a lot is the rates of suicide among security staff, and I don't think it's just a problem in New York. I know California is concerned, and they've commissioned a study on it. And I've asked my mental health staff to really take a good look at the resources that are available and how we can connect people to help that they need before it's too late. It's a tough job. There's a lot of stress on the job, and I think part of the problem is a reluctance to come forward and admit you're feeling the stress or it's affecting you. And it's not easy to go home at night and then become a normal family man and a normal parent when you've had the stress of perhaps an assault, perhaps witnessing a suicide of an inmate. It's a very tough job. So my goal, among others, is to try and make the working environment, not just for our security staff, but for all our civilians, as safe as possible. And I'm more than happy we meet regularly with the unions. If they have suggestions, things that we can do that might be positive, wellness programs, nutrition programs, we've partnered in the past with them, and it's a valuable relationship. But anything to be done to make it a better, more healthy working environment for them, I think in turn would help with our attrition rate.
Well, I think one of the issues that would have kept more officers on the job is the fact that if this bill would have been signed, it's a real risk for their family if they stay on past the time that they're able to retire. If something does happen to the officer, the family's not entitled to the retirement benefits, and I think that's something that should be addressed. I understand I'm over my time, so I have one last question for you. You know, as we're looking for ways to make sure there are resources in place for safe staffing level, I really don't understand the mental health transport issue, especially when it has to do with the hub that I represent. We actually have a correctional facility, 2 of them, within sight of a psychiatric center. But when an inmate needs a mental health evaluation, they are transported over 2 hours to a facility. Many times the officers have to come back just to find out the next day they go back to pick the inmate up and bring them back. If we're looking for a way to save money for the state as a whole and to be more efficient, I really don't understand with a psychiatric facility, you know, a stone's throw away, why we can't put some kind of resources in place so that an inmate who needs an evaluation can be just transported across the street, saving 2 officers back and forth on multiple days times 5 prisons. So I would ask, we brought this up in the past, you know, I understand there's a couple agencies that would have to work on this, but if we're looking for a way to save money and be more efficient, this looks like it would be something that would be very easy to do.
I'll certainly look into that, Senator.
And you know, just to close, I would like to, you know, just take a moment to thank you, but also thank the men and women who work in our correctional facilities. I think when you go and tour the facilities and you see what they're up against, it gives you a greater appreciation for how dangerous their jobs are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assemblyman Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner. Thank you, and I'd like to extend my thanks to your office. You've always been very accommodating to me in anything I've reached out with, so thank you. I have a little bit of experience. I've been, in my previous life, I was a correction officer for over 20 years and dealt with these things on a day-to-day issue. I know the number one thing we need to do is keep contraband out of these facilities, because we know anytime we introduce contraband into these facilities, puts our hardworking men and women that work in those facilities and the inmates that want to go to programs and do the right thing, it puts everybody in jeopardy. So I just want to, on top of the Senator's point and the Assemblyman, my colleagues, we need to seriously take a look at the secured package program again. I think we are on the right path. If we have to make a few adjustments to it, I think it's one way, one tool we can use to keep contraband out of the facilities. We need to do that. I also want to associate with Assemblyman Palmisano because double bunking needs to go. Just got to go. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It still exists. We can call it by any other name, but just I would like to see it go. I do have a question here. I'm not going to grandstand the whole time. The implementation of pepper spray, we're doing it on a pilot basis. Could you give, I know the Senator had touched on it, could you give me a time frame on when statewide implementation of that would be?
We hope to have it complete in 2018.
2018 for statewide implementation? Okay, great. I'm going to keep it brief. I want to, thank you again, your office, for everything we've done. But I really do need to stress that we need to do everything we can to keep our hardworking men and women, COs and civilians in those facilities safe. And I would please explore and go and take a look at the implementation of the secured vending program again. I'm happy to hear from you that we're not just canceling it, we're taking another look at it, but I think we need to do that. You get the reports in your office every day about contraband. I get reports. I have 5 correctional facilities in my district, in my assembly district also. We need to help protect our hardworking men and women that work in those facilities. Please take a look at that policy. We can make some tweaks to it. We can make everybody in the correctional facility safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Savino.
Thank you. Commissioner, good to see you. So
Good to see
just
you,
have
Senator.
1 or 2 questions for you. As you know, for the past several years, whenever you've come before us, we had to address the issue of overtime and its effect on the budget. I didn't see anything about it in your testimony or even in the governor's budget. You can tell us a bit about the staffing levels now and whether or not you're still relying on overtime to the extent that you used to be?
Well, overtime is driven by a number of things, and some of the things that have changed in the last 2 years are we seem to see more one-on-one watches for people that are at risk, the mentally ill, and those are ordered by OMH. Outside hospital trips are costly, unplanned for. And at any one time, I have a significant number of officers that are out on workers' comp, which we're not really funded to cover that.
Right.
Those are unanticipated expenses. So we have, as of last week, 986 or so officers out on comp. I think that needs to be looked at. The overwhelming majority have nothing to do with inmate contact, and obviously I would be able to really make a dent in the overtime if more staff were present at work. So that's subject to negotiations, and can't really comment much further on that.
And I think that nurse at Bedford Hills, Mercy, I think she finally retired. She probably has a pension worth $500,000, but God bless her, she worked hard for it. But I want to return back to the issue of double bunking, so make sure I understand this, because, for years the corrections officers would come up and do a visual. They would bring, a model of what double bunking looked like, and quite frankly, it looked inhuman. But, so let me just see. So before the massive increase in the prison population in the 1980s, it used to be 50 beds to a dorm, right? And then after that, because of the explosion in the inmate population, it went up to 60.
50, it was 54, really.
54. Now, and then
Now
we
it's
allowed
60.
us to go up to 60. But the inmate population is now at the lowest it's been in several years.
Correct.
In fact, we've closed prisons. So if we were to eliminate double bunking, we wouldn't have any empty beds then in the prison system at all, would we? And why not do that? Since we know that.
Because, Senator, this is a difficult fiscal year. We're facing enormous challenges. We have so much uncertainty out of Washington. To the extent that we continue to downsize in our population, the responsible thing to do in the absence of closures is for me to do consolidations, and that is, you have a facility, let's say, with 14 dorms, but you only need really 11, then you consolidate 3 of them. And the other 11 may be filled close to 60. But at least you're saving the staffing for those dorms. And I think we do owe a responsibility to the taxpayers. If it was a question of this presenting an unsafe situation, then that would be different. But we have operated under that standard for years, and I think everybody over-focuses on the fact that it's a bunk bed, that it's 2 beds, one on top of another. That's what you see in many college dorms, and maybe a lot less. So
Different population. I mean, so if what you're saying is that the double bunking is not a problem, why is it routinely pointed out to us by those who work in the prison system, the corrections officers, former corrections officers, that it creates problems? It creates, issues between the inmates and between the corrections officers? I mean, are they just misrepresenting it, or is it really a problem?
I don't think it's really a problem, but it's a question of if it was less inmates, it would be less issues to worry about. So I get where they're coming from. And, you know, the argument that take down all the double bunks in the back and you would have less inmates in the dorm to worry about. But the real concerns, the real incidents that I concern about most of all aren't in my medium security facilities, right? They're in my maxes.
Right.
That's where the long-termers are. That's where most of the gang violence is. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. So for the most part, the mediums are running very well, even with, you know, 60-man dorms and other dorms that have double bunks.
Well, I'm glad to hear they run very well, and I guess we've got to give some credit to the staff that works there, the corrections officers and the non-uniform staff, and of course yourself. I just want to thank you for your testimony and for the comments you've just made. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Senator Kruger.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I'm sorry I had to leave for a little while. So, sexual harassment is a hot topic in the world we live in right now, and I'm wondering what you are doing to decrease the chances of an inmate being raped in one of your prisons. I have found any number of rape accusations in the last year by women who are inmates in state prisons, and I'm wondering whether there's some kind of change in policy that you're implementing or can implement to try to decrease the number of incidents. And I don't know that they're all against women, by the way, so I don't want to be sexist. They're just the cases that I found.
Well, first of all, Senator, we are moving fast and furious to be fully compliant with the Prison Rape Elimination Act. Those are standards that were promulgated by the feds that we have to comply with. We've had 45, I believe, or 46 of our 54 facilities accredited under PREA. Those are strict standards. Outside auditors come in and walk through the entire facility. It's required us to make changes here and there, privacy curtains for the showers, mirrors so that blind spots are eliminated. A lot to do with the LGBT community, how you respectfully communicate with them, et cetera. So many, many changes there. With respect to our female facilities, I've taken a number of additional steps. First, we are adding, I believe, and there were already fixed cameras at Bedford, but I'm adding something like, I'm going to say 800. I hope I'm not wrong on that number. I'll double check that. So we're really expanding our fixed camera system there. I've instituted body cameras and requiring staff to wear them. To the best of my knowledge, no other correctional system in the country is even close to what we're doing. When it's fully implemented, we will have ordered, I believe, 650 body cameras for staff to use, particularly when they're in areas of the facility where there are not the fixed cameras. I've also instituted a number that the inmates can call to make a direct complaint to our Office of Special Investigations. I think it's just either star 44 or star 45. They hit that, and they're connected directly to our OSI. I've also had our OSI make unannounced visits there, walk through the units, and get the feedback directly from the offender population. So while obviously the Prison Rape Elimination Act applies to all of our facilities and all individuals have to be protected, I'm especially mindful of the potential vulnerability of female staff. And when we have successfully identified and obtained the evidence, we go for criminal prosecution. We have a strong partnership in Bedford Hills with the Westchester DA and with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then we hold up as examples of deterrence what happened. And one individual recently was convicted and is serving time in a federal prison. And in my training video, which all staff listened to, I warned them in very stark terms, think about for a moment what it would be like to one day being a person employed by the department and the next day being a person confined by the department. And we have absolutely have to have a zero tolerance policy for that. Inmates deserve to be protected. I pushed years ago to change the law so that as a matter of law, an inmate cannot consent to a sexual relationship, given the relationship of the power differential. And I was glad years ago that the legislature acted on that. So just like a 15-year-old can't consent, an inmate confined in a correctional facility cannot consent.
Thank you. I appreciate you're doing this. I'm just curious because we're rolling out body cameras in police forces as well, and there seems to be a little bit of discussion about then who has access to review the tapes and can they be used as evidence by people who file the complaints. What will be your policy with the body camera?
We
tapes?
absolutely would use them as evidence if we need to, and we haven't had any problem that I'm aware of reviewing them and turning them over. And some minor problems initially, some of them didn't work properly, but that's to be expected with any pilot, and we are going forward with that, and the next facility, I believe, is Taconic, and a number of our other MAX facilities, males.
So when an inmate comes forward through the phone number to the Inspector General, are they then provided representation in some way? What happens?
No, we opened an investigation. They've officially lodged the complaint, and the reason that we did this is we wanted to give another means by which if a female feels that it's unsafe to either write a letter or, ask to meet with OSI, this is a direct connection. They can make that complaint and hopefully feel safe doing it, and we'll then open an investigation and go see what's involved.
Just my time is up, but are they moved or the person they accuse moved during the investigation?
It depends. It depends on the facts and circumstance. I mean, number one, if there's any potential credibility there, number one priority is keep her safe. And whatever we have to do that, we'll make sure that happens.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Senator Roebuck.
Yes, thank you, President. Very quickly, I'll get to it. We talked a lot about inmates.
Mike.
Are we on there? Talked a lot about inmates, a lot about people that work in that. I'd like to just touch on a couple of things here about the other population group, the public we're trying to protect. I'll get right to it because we have limited time. I'm a little concerned with, more merit time and great time allowance. We have had a lot of recidivism in Rochester, which I know you're aware of. They've been horrendous cases, and the statement keeps being made by docs that 100% of the time, violent felons do 80% of their time. I don't think that's true, but I'd like us to work toward it. So I guess my question would be do you really think we need to be letting more people, or would some of these violent people be eliminated from the pool of merit time and or credit time allowances? I do think it's a very small percentage of the people, but I do think we've had too many, I'll say, for a lot of nefarious reasons, slip through the cracks, and I think we could do both things and address that with some work. I just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, Senator, I appreciate your remarks, and I think part of our problem is we use the term violent felony offender and we paint a very broad brush, and I'm very mindful of the very bad cases that happened in your area and deeply regret that it did happen. But I think starting with day-to-day operations in a correctional facility, having meaningful incentives for inmates to behave. This is two-pronged. It's not just that you do this program and you'll get the benefit. You also have to have a very positive institutional record. And if you don't meet that criteria, you're not getting the benefit. And for the limited credit time, it means you can't, for example, have had a recommended loss of good time in the prior 5 years, or you can't have maintained an overall poor institutional record. And it also means you can't have filed a frivolous lawsuit. And it's the same thing with merit time, different category of offender that's eligible, but he has to maintain the record. If he has a total amount of either SHU or KEEP-LAC sanctions in excess of 60 days, he's not eligible to get it. So these are very important incentives, I think, and helps make our prisons safer because there's a strong incentive to behave. And I think the people that commit the offenses that committed in Rochester, they wouldn't get the benefit of that kind of program while they were incarcerated with us.
Yeah.
I really doubt that they would be able to meet those standards.
Well, what I would hope as we move forward, I think there should be a standard. That was a sentence, or the line I got from docs. I like that. I would like 80% time served for violent felons, and I think they should be defined by, people that do inflict bodily injury, shooters, rapists, murderers. I mean, some of the people that have been let out early, very concerning to me. Yeah. And then just real quickly.
But sex offenders are not eligible. By law, they would not be eligible for limited credit time.
Well, I think we ought to put more people in that category too, just for my 2 cents. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't say it too, and I don't want to make it personal. While I get that, I'd like to know what the definition is of debilitating age release. What would constitute debilitating? Would that mean they couldn't be physically able to get up and attack somebody else? What would define that?
Well, our job is to look at somebody with these conditions, whatever it may be, and it may be advanced arthritis, it may be a severely weakened heart that the person has difficulty moving from point A to point B, and us making an assessment and understanding this person now has severe limitation in caring for themselves. The whole reason why we have regional medical units, among others, and unit for the cognitively impaired is these individuals cannot function on their own. In fact, were we to release them, many of them would have to be placed in some kind of hospital-like setting, a hospice setting or a nursing home placement. Now, can they possibly pose a danger to others? That's a judgment that you have to make, and I think you make that in 3 ways. Number one, you know what the whole history is, right? You look at his original crime. You look at how long he's been incarcerated. You look at the amount of time remaining on his sentence. And then you make an assessment during the interview, and that's what the parole board is going to do going forward.
Well, good, because again, we had another one in Rochester, 59-year-old. I saw the tape. He was very, very capable of being very, very violent. And, again, I don't know if the right answer is quantify the conditions or raise the age, or maybe some combination. But I would say this, I mean this sincerely. You have a very, very hard job. But I think some of the things that are being suggested, if they're not implemented correctly, I really believe they're going to put more of the public in danger who has done nothing. Mm-hmm. And so I hope, I really do, I know there's a push for a lot of reforms and some of them are good, but I hope you're in an influence of power that you'll even talk to the governor directly, and hopefully when we get to the end of this, some of those loopholes or some of those things will be diminished greatly. I really think if we don't take that opportunity, we'll be doing the wrong thing. So I appreciate you considering those. Sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Robach. Our next speaker is Senator Rivera and then Senator Little.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, so I have a few things, and I apologize that I had to be in and out, so some of the stuff you might have already covered. I did want to start where Senator Bonsack just ended. I'm sorry, Senator Robach. You kind of, I get confused sometimes between you and Recidivism. Anyway, the geriatric parole. The current proposal, and I'm sure that in the line of questioning that you had with Senator Robach, you did discuss it, but if you could give me just in a minute the overall, but I certainly get the reasoning, but tell me how it's structured currently as far as the proposal is concerned.
Okay, so this is in addition to the current medical parole types, one for the terminally ill, one for the severely debilitated in a terminal. And this is looking at a cohort of individuals who are 55 and older and who are suffering from some conditions that, when coupled with their advanced age, severely limits their ability to care for themselves in the correctional facility setting. And as a starter, we're looking at the individuals who meet that criteria and are either in our unit for the cognitively impaired or one of our regional medical units, which provide skilled nursing care. Obviously, these individuals aren't able to function on their own. So those would be, without knowing any individual cases, the potential pool that you'd start with, that you'd look at carefully and perhaps refer to the Board of Parole. My determination and my doctor's determination is solely to whether or not they have those conditions debilitating them. It's then up to the Board of Parole to decide whether or not their release is incompatible with the welfare of society.
There you go. So since some time is limited, so first on the issue of debilitating, right? Is that the word or the terminology that's used in the proposal? Debilitating. And is there a clear definition of what debilitating means?
Other than the dictionary definition, if it's not written in that statute, I don't think so. But I think it's more the result that's happening, to the individual. What is their condition? What are they able to do? Can they help themselves? Do they require help?
Okay.
For activities of daily living.
Once you make that determination, you have the person has to be above 55 and fit the criteria of debilitating, of having debilitating condition, then they are eligible, but this does nothing to change the statute that currently exists, which particularly as it relates to instant offense. In many instances, people who have paid their debt to society 15, 20, 30 years, they have rehabilitated in all sorts of different ways, but yet are not paroled. So basically this changes nothing of that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about overdoses. Particularly, what is the protocol currently when an incarcerated person overdoses inside a facility?
So we have a standing order where our nurses, without a doctor's order, this is an arrangement by the Department of Health, can, if they suspect an overdose, can inject Narcan to bring somebody back. We have Narcan kits available. We don't have to wait for the medical.
But after, let's say that happens, the person is stabilized. I've heard some reports, and they've been very troubling, that as part of the protocol in some facilities, that somebody, after they have survived a overdose, that they're put in SHU.
No. First things first, we have to save lives. Mm-hmm. And somebody who's in an overdose situation, we have to bring them back right away. So it's routine, without us knowing if the person took drugs or not. If they are unresponsive, and this happens a lot, right, we will administer Narcan immediately, right? And hopefully bring them back. But there have been periods where we've had to rush 25 people at different times during the week to outside hospitals for opioids. Now, after that, when they come back, obviously they violated our institutional rules. They may be charged with an act of misconduct, and they may be placed in segregated confinement. I don't know that that's been done in any specific case, but it's a logical follow-up for that.
I would want to have further conversations with you at some other point, because it is, as we've had this conversation, this ongoing conversation, talking about addiction as a public health issue. Obviously, this is a slightly different situation because we're talking about somebody that's already incarcerated, but it seems that that this is obviously a punitive action that is taken about something to someone. I'd want to talk with you about that further. Sure. Just one more thing, since I've run out of time, but I have one more question I quickly want to ask. That is about how many people currently incarcerated are there for technical parole violations? If you have any sense of that, and I might come back for a second round.
Sure. I mean, first of all, the governor's directed my community supervision staff and the Board of Parole to work with the Reentry Council to look at the parole revocation guidelines. Those guidelines were created back in the 90s, and they're very much dependent upon the original crime of commitment. If the original crime of commitment was violent, then the penalty for a technical violation is longer. That doesn't make sense anymore. That needs to be changed. And I've internally been looking at that with my staff and coming up with some potential ideas. We take very seriously what the legislature wanted when you directed us to merge, and you wanted us to use graduated sanctions And so, for example, we have a lot of alternatives that didn't exist 5 years ago. Our parole diversion programs, we have it at Edgecombe and Hale Creek in Orleans. It's a 45-day program. Instead of sending one up to a regular facility for 2 years. They successfully complete that program, they return to the community, they still are eligible for a merit discharge of sentence. We have the Reset Initiative, where we have a grid of responses to both negative behavior and good behavior. The negative behavior might be just 1 day or 2 days, you're placed back in the facility, but it's done up front. We know that the parolee signs a contract. If I do this, this will happen. If I do that, that will happen. But I think there's a lot more room to be had. And I know there was a report. I didn't read the report. But I know that last week there were 130 people in Rikers Island that were our parolees on a technical warrant only. So I think there was a lot of misleading things about what that report claimed.
Thank you, Senator Little.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Commissioner, for being here. A lot of topics have been touched on today, but I'd like to begin by thanking you for your leadership in many of these programs that you mentioned today, the veterans programs, all of those, the tablets that you're now providing, and also to your staff. I have 9 facilities in my district, state facilities and 1 federal. And wonderful people working day and night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in these facilities. I just also can touch upon the double bunking, have seen the difference that eliminating the 2 to a cell has made at Great Meadow. Recently toured there again, and it was a big difference in what went on. And I'm sure it's a lot safer for the correction officers working there. But I do want to mention one facility that I was at just recently in Mariah Shock. And I know that you had a great deal to do with forming the program way back. But nevertheless, I just couldn't say enough about it, how commendable the superintendent was, the counselors that were there, the people that were there. And I guess my biggest question, there were only 170 inmates there when there's a capacity of 300. 2 questions, actually. I wonder if there's a way that rather than bringing inmates from other parts of the state out to Lakeville for intake and then bringing them back to Mariah, if there's a way to do the intake at Mariah, might save on some transportation. And secondly, how do we get more inmates to benefit from this program? Because you could see we spent quite a few hours there, that this is a program that's very beneficial to them. And then as well, I'm sure your agency wouldn't be in charge of it, but when they get out, something that's going to help them get through, whether it's military or some way. And we talked about some more training and workforce training, like maybe volunteer fire squadrons or basic EMS training that could take place among them and help them out. But they do a great job in their work programs, and I can't say enough about it. I wish everybody got a chance to see this place. It's just really commendable, and I thank you very much for that. But some questions, how to make it bigger. So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate your comments very much. I'm very proud of the SHOCK program in general. It saved taxpayers, since it was created, over $1.5 billion in prison cost avoidance. I think it really builds character in the individuals that graduate. It's amazing the difference when you see when they first start the program and when they end up, and it's basically a lot of dedication by staff, and Mariah in particular has a wonderful superintendent. And I'm always getting letters, acknowledgments from the community, the appreciation when the work crews help out, helping to put out fires sometimes, and various other things. What we did was originally we made Lakeview the reception center because we wanted more inmates to volunteer, and we wanted them to get out of reception and see what a real program was like and be interested in signing up for it. Many years ago, we had so many more drug offenders than we have now. We had at one time like 24,000, and now we have about 6,700. So there's a lot less from the pool to apply for that program. But we can recruit from general population when they become within 3 years or less of their release date. And I know superintendent has some ideas to maybe market the idea that you can spend your last 3 years in a shock facility and get out by serving 6 months. We can certainly, I think, up enrollment there. Someone suggested that this process for lean might be appropriate to do that. And I might, revisit having central office play more of a role as to, who goes to Lakeview, who goes to Mariah. The program is wonderful. They do a great job at Mariah. And if there are creative ways to get more inmates to volunteer, I think it's a win-win all around for public safety. They're better for it. It's just a very good program.
Yeah. There is a YouTube Prison with No Walls that you can just go on YouTube and watch. It gives you a good example. But the counselors, the amount of investment they have in the inmates and working with them, and can't say enough about it, but thank you, and I just hope more people can benefit from that program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioner. Thank you for your patience and your testimony thus far. I was looking over the comments concerning the your testimony concerning the maritime statutes, and I look at it as generally positive. How many people would you estimate would benefit from the maritime expansion?
How do I think people would benefit from it?
No, how many people, approximately how many people would benefit from that?
Under the new change?
Yes, under the new change, sir.
It's not going to be big numbers, and I know that we have a number that was given for the budget. I just can't remember. It's not huge. Basically, it's individuals who would, for example, not need any of the other criteria, not be in need of substance abuse treatment, not need a GED, someone who's already got a high school diploma. But there's some number of them, that would qualify and meet it. So I think, I'm pretty sure it's a low number, but I think we still need to assess what's out there to come up with a firm number. I'll try and do that and get back to you on that.
I thank you for that. Within that potential expansion, is there a possibility of, and I know you just said you're not sure about the numbers, but is there a possibility of expanding vocational or college programs within that?
Well, we have a huge college program expansion. Very grateful what the governor did, arranged with the Manhattan DA's office. Danny funding is going to allow, when it's fully up, an additional 2,400 college slots. We already have Pell Grant. We'll have college at 26 of our facilities. So we're very proud of that, and I think it's really transformative in what it does safety-wise and for the rest of the population. The VOC programs we have, and we have 28 of them, and they are really good programs. And what I've had program staff do is they're making a DVD, and they've had our VOC instructors and inmates for each of our programs speak on camera. The VOC instructor talking about, well, this is what you first train a new arrival at. First they're a little skeptical, and what am I going to do with this? And then you have the inmate speak and say, yes, I was a little shy, but now I understand. This is, a great tool. This is a great trade to learn. And once this is all done, we're hopeful to perhaps give that to some employers outside, because it's one thing to have someone present with a piece of paper, this is the skill I learned when I participated in culinary arts. It's another thing to hear the person who trains them, where they also learn the soft skills, the importance of showing up to work on time, putting your tools away, being respectful, etc., and the actual trade they're learning. So when this DVD is finished, I think it really will showcase about 28 different VOC programs that we have. And I think a prospective employer who looks at this will really be enticed to potentially hire someone.
Okay. That's excellent, because one of the goals that we obviously have in restorative justice is to restore people to a place where they can be productive once they re-enter society. So I do thank you for that. One final question concerning the temporary release programs, the pilot programs. I know that certain offenses are excluded, but it says that for inmates who would otherwise be ineligible for other release programs. Can you walk me through that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a long story and it's very complicated. The statute is 851 of the correction law. Basically what we're doing is the same cohort of inmates that are eligible for LCTA, right, which basically is you're not eligible for merit time. You know, people that are serving longer sentences, except for sex offenders, would be eligible. It's a very small number. It's 50, which in a population of 50,000 is 1/10 of 1%. So 50 for work release, 50 for educational release, and it's a pilot. You know, we have basically walled off whole cohorts of offenders from these programs. These are the best transitional services programs you have because you gradually acclimate to living in the community. So when you're in a work release facility, yes, you're still serving your sentence, but you're able to leave the facility, get a job. You're able to furlough to an approved residence. So instead of going from confined in a correctional facility 24 hours a day, you gradually get used to being released in the community. And I can tell you, if you've been in the system for a long time, 20 years, it's overwhelming when you get out. It's just, the technology has changed. People get intimidated just crossing the street. They end up in tears because they lose sight of their wife in Walmart. That's a real story. So having people gradually get released into the community who have proven themselves over time, and our superintendents, our facility staff, have a good sense of who's good, who's a safe risk. We do that for work release. For educational release, the possibilities are endless. We have all these individuals that are participating in college programs, and I can tell you when we brought outside students into our correctional facilities to share a classroom, it's been an extremely positive experience. I got this absolutely glowing letter from a colonel with West Point because we allow their cadets to come in, share a classroom with inmates in Eastern maximum security facility or Woodburn. And the letter thanked me for having, the foresight to allow this to happen. And this is going to build better cadets. The future military leaders are going to defend this country because they are now exposed to individuals that they never would see before. When you put people of differences in the same setting, common purpose, educational learning, everybody all of a sudden has their eyes open. So this would take it to the next step. Instead of bringing the outside students into our facilities, limited number, 50, would be able from our work release facility, like Lincoln and maybe Rochester, or a couple of others, go into the college program, and the colleges would accept them. John Jay, for example, has a presence. They teach in Otisville. They're going to teach at Queensboro. They are chomping at the bit to have this happen because they see this. Everybody's concerned about how do we break the cycle, and education is so key to breaking the cycle.
Thank you.
Assemblyman Palmisano.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate my indulgence of my colleagues for a follow-up. And Commissioner, I appreciate your time. I know it's been a long day. Something in your comments kind of caught my attention. I just kind of wanted to follow up on it. I know when we were talking about the issue of double bunking, I thought I heard correctly said some more of the issues are around our maximum security prisons. And I kind of want to disagree with you on that from the perspective of when we look at the violence, and we talk about the violence statistics that are going on in our facilities, inmate on assault, and we talk about generally the broad numbers, just total. In 2012, it was 524. In 2017, it was 798. But if you look at the medium security facilities, in 2012 was 114 assault inmate on corrections officers on staff. In 2017, it was 198. That's nearly a 75% increase in assaults going on in our medium security facilities. And been to, the most recent assault happened in Groveland, nearby my district. I've been to Groveland and Livingston. And when I went to that facility, the double bunks, they weren't just the ones on the back, they were the whole corridor. And I think with the closures, I think this has kind of expanded this problem. The violence in our mediums are going up, the reclassification of prisoners, the increase of gangs into drugs. I think this is a growing problem. And I know you mentioned in your testimony about, we have a responsibility, and when someone asks, why can't we just get rid of them? Well, we have a responsibility to taxpayers. The only thing I would say, and that I can't speak for everyone, but the taxpayers I represent would want us to make sure we're spending the proper resources to make sure that the men and women who go to a dangerous job every day have the resources they need to do their job. And we would rather see it spent on them to protect them than maybe some of these, the settlement we talked about, taking away tools, some of these other things that are going for those in the facilities. We have to have a balance. I'm not saying we can't do everything, but we have to have a balance. And I think it's important that we're making sure that we let our corrections officers and our people working in these dangerous environments that we have their backs. And I'm not sure they feel we have that way. So if it means revisiting the packaging program that the governor rescinded right away, we should do that. If it means drug dogs in every correctional facility, then we should do that. If it means pepper spray straight-wide, then we should do that. If it means more staffing in our facilities, then we should do that. If it means we're getting rid of the double bunks and the double cells once and for all, we should do that. If we need to lower the threshold on the number of beds in a dorm setting, then we should do that. And I've heard that there's been situations in a double bunk, double cell, where there's been the inmate murdered his inmate. So it's definitely a problem. But when I look at those statistics, from 114 assaults in a medium security prison to 198 in just 5 years, we have a problem in our facilities that need to be addressed, and we need to make sure that these officers, these people who go to work every day, know we have their back. 75% increase is unacceptable, and we need to find out and get at the root of that problem. The drugs, the gangs, all of that. And we need to send a clear message. The governor could send a real clear message to the corrections officers and the men and women who work in these facilities that we have their back. And I just haven't heard it from him, Commissioner. And I know you speak very highly of the men and women who work in our facilities, but we need the governor to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And I have a concern on this issue, and I'm going to continue to speak out. A lot of my colleagues will, but when I see those statistics, you can't dismiss them because they're from your website. It's a 75% increase of inmate on correction officers on staff assaults increase in 5 years. And I think the double bunking, the double celling, the prison closures are a part of that. And I just want to make sure you understood that from my perspective, and hopefully that's something we can address when we're making investments in changing our correctional facility operations. So anything you want to comment on that? Otherwise, I appreciate you just taking my comments into consideration.
Briefly.
I'll be very, very brief. The only thing I will say is with the assault numbers, remember, this is not the penal law definition of assault. We have a very low threshold. If you just reach out and grab an officer's hand, you've laid your hands on an officer, that's an assault. So to understand the level of violence, you also have to look at what kind of injuries are involved. And you promulgated new standards for us years ago, and we agreed to them. We have 4 different definitions. The overwhelming majority, like 74-something%, no injury at all. And couple that with the minor injury, it's something like 90-something%. Only a very small percentage are actually moderate, and I don't think we've had any severe. I'd have to double check. Again, I don't condone ever, putting your hands on an officer, but in terms of the violence, you have to look at those numbers as well, and the increase. The increases bother me, but the increase this year is still less than what we had, the total number in 2015. So I'm not sure there's a dangerous trend there as you're concerned. And also, I will say just one anecdotal story that I think really epitomizes the governor's care for our correctional staff. It was Memorial Day weekend, I think 2 years ago, when we got the word that a correction officer at home was severely burnt when a bomb blew up in his face. And we had no idea, where that came from. The original thought it could be an inmate. That was on, Sunday morning. That Monday, he was in the hospital to visit with that family. He couldn't see the officer. He was so severely burned. Thank God he's recovered, and thank God it had nothing to do with the inmate population. But I'm sure on a Memorial Day weekend, he had better things to do than to drop everything and get out to that hospital and check on that officer's condition.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Senator Rivera has a 60-second question, and we would ask that you answer within 60 seconds. Thank you.
I got 60, so I'm going to do. Sir, do you know, I look forward to following up on all the things that we talked about in the first round, but just really quickly, do you know a gentleman by the name of Rick Ramish? Rick Ramish is the corrections commissioner for the state of Colorado.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, Colorado.
So I would suggest, see, and I still have 50 seconds. One thing that I would suggest, as he did, he actually spent 24 hours at a SHU.
Yes, I know that.
And I would suggest that's one of the things that maybe you should do as well. If we're going to be ahead of the curve in this state as far as progressive policy, we should move in that direction. And I didn't even use the whole 60 seconds. Thank you, Madam Chair.
That would probably be the best night's sleep I'd had in a long time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next speaker is